Hello there, this is William Hong from First Day Realty Inc. Today, I'll discuss one of the most crucial topics in practice, real estate offer negotiation strategies. Since there's quite a lot of content, I'll try to proceed a bit quickly and efficiently. First, to explain why negotiations are difficult, let me start with a real-life example. There was a house actually worth about $1,200,000, but the deal fell through over a difference of about $15,000. To put it simply, if a $1 million house deal falls apart over a $10,000 difference, that's just 1%. The deal didn't go through because of 1% of the house price. Logically and rationally, that's actually pretty hard to understand. However, things like this happen all the time. The reason these things happen is that, in the end, negotiation is a kind of battlefield of logic plus emotion. A battlefield. It's a battlefield where in reality there are winners and losers, though I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether people are rational animals or emotional animals, but my feeling is that we're a bit closer to being emotional animals. Especially among Koreans, there are quite a few people who are hot-tempered, so while there is a rational side, I often think that maybe 80% of it is actually emotional. I feel this a lot in real work situations. That's why you need a realtor who is rich in knowledge and experience, not just any ordinary realtor, but someone who has truly accumulated a lot of experience and knowledge when it comes to making deals. Such a realtor is extremely important, absolutely essential. So I've summarized the three main reasons why negotiations fail. First of all, there's impaired judgment due to emotional involvement. Emotional involvement and pride can sometimes be intertwined, but to start with, emotional involvement usually happens from the seller's perspective. For example, how great is my house? If you've lived in your house for a long time and have a deep, endless affection for it, this often leads to a certain bias, because you have an overly inflated expectation about your own house. If a buyer points out even a small flaw, you can react very emotionally. Also, from the buyer's perspective, when they find their dream home, they can become completely fixated, thinking, I absolutely have to buy this house. The moment they fall in love like this, their ability to make rational decisions often decreases. Battles of pride are extremely common. It's like, well, why am I the only one being asked to make concessions? When you feel like the other person is looking down on you, or you can't sense their sincerity, you might even think, isn't this person a thief? When you get that kind of feeling, emotions get involved and the deal becomes extremely complicated. So there are actually a lot of cases where negotiations fail because of pride. Also, the collapse of trust due to either neglecting or obsessing over details. I'll talk more about this later, but as they say, the devil is in the details. When you're working, in many cases, even after the price and major terms have mostly been agreed upon, suddenly an unexpected variable arises or a deadlock occurs over some detail, and the entire deal faces a major crisis. For example, cleaning is a typical case. In the case of condos, there are rooms with carpets, right? In such cases, the tenant lived there and then moved out. So during the move-out, a move-out inspection is done, and professional cleaning is carried out. But from the buyer's perspective, isn't it common to include clauses requiring professional carpet cleaning or shampoo cleaning when dealing with condos that have carpets? So, naturally, it's usually included as a standard clause, but even if the seller says, we've already finished cleaning the house, we've hired a professional cleaner, and everything is done, the buyer might still feel uncertain. They might say, I still feel uneasy, so please clean it one more time. They'll ask for another round of professional cleaning. When requests like this are made, and someone insists that it doesn't make sense or is unreasonable, emotions can get involved, and the entire deal can be shaken. This kind of thing happens quite often. Next, when it comes to one-sided communication, whether it's the buyer or the seller, if each party only says what they want and only listens to themselves, the chances of the negotiation failing are actually quite high. So if you lose your composure, you lose everything. It's very important to approach things with great caution. So I've summarized the core principles of real estate offer negotiations into three main points. First of all, I've written the dictionary definition of negotiation below, which says that according to Naver Encyclopedia, negotiation is the process by which two or more parties who are willing to reach an agreement communicate bilaterally to arrive at a mutually satisfactory agreement. The wording is very difficult and abstract, isn't it? So I like to simplify the biggest principle of negotiation as give and take, not give and give. It's not take and take either, it absolutely has to be give and take. So it's really the art of mutual concession. Why is this important? Ultimately, for a negotiation to succeed, there needs to be a rapport between both parties. That's what it's called in English. Forming this rapport is the most critical factor. Without this, negotiations don't go well. So, The seller likes Biden, and the buyer also likes the seller. Especially from the seller's perspective, it's very important to give the impression, I like this buyer. If this buyer buys this house, I'll feel relieved and good about it. Where does this rapport come from? Ultimately, it comes from both sides making small mutual concessions and gradually converging toward a middle ground. So, if I make a small concession, you should also show sincerity and make a small concession. When both sides demonstrate this kind of sincerity and show respect for each other, little by little concessions are made, and as you converge toward the middle, rapport builds up. In the end, when this happens, the likelihood of a deal being made becomes very high. Especially when dealing with things like small businesses, this rapport building model is even more important. That's because, from the seller's perspective, they're always looking at what kind of person the buyer is. Is this someone who will ruin the business I've worked so hard to build? Or is it someone who can take it even further and help it grow? Because of this, building rapport between both parties is extremely important. And this rapport is built up little by little through small mutual concessions and by converging toward a common ground. So, as I mentioned earlier about give and take, win-win is the best strategy. Of course, a perfect 50-50 split is realistically difficult. Maybe it ends up 65-45, or 70-30, or 60-40. But one-sided deals like 10-0 or 9-1, unless it's a multiple offer situation, will ultimately fall apart in a normal single offer transaction. So I want to emphasize once again that win-win, not win-lose, is the best strategy. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, the devil is always in the details. This is something that after working in real estate for so long, I really feel this way. I don't know who came up with the phrase, the devil is in the details, but it's truly a wise saying. The devil is definitely in the details. As I mentioned earlier, it's quite common for an entire deal on $1 million house to fall apart just because neither side can concede even 1%. Also, tough negotiations over some minor detail can ruin the whole deal. Like I mentioned before about cleaning the cafe, that's one example. And sometimes I found that the feeling or impression matters more than the numbers themselves. What I mean is, it really depends on the personality of the buyer or the seller. For example, the buyer might be too overbearing. They think they can do everything perfectly themselves. So they try to take the lead and control everything, or on the other hand, the seller might be too rigid and overbearing. In these cases, making a deal is really difficult. But even more realistically and importantly, whether a deal goes through or falls apart often depends on what kind of person the other realtor is. It's very common for deals that should go smoothly to fail, or for deals that seemed impossible to actually happen, all because of the realtor involved. From the perspective of the listing agent, if the buyer's agent approaches in a very high-handed manner, is uncooperative, and acts unilaterally, it immediately creates a very bad impression. In such cases, the deal often gets rejected at the realtor level before it even goes any further. So, when the realtor reports to their client, they can't help but give a negative report, and the same applies in reverse. From the buyer agent's perspective as well, if the listing agent is too high-handed, doesn't make time, doesn't reply to emails, and acts in an overbearing way, they will also tell their client about it. This realtor has a lot of problems. There's no response at all, so it seems like it would be really difficult. That's why they might say, how about looking for another place, another house? So the role of the other party's realtor is also very important. Anyway, looking at the big picture, the devil is not merely found within the initial price tag. There are also a vast number of intricate details and subtle fine points hidden everywhere you look. For the third key principle of this process, I have summarized it as the true power of active listening. There is a well-known joke that when God first created human beings, he intentionally gave us 2 ears but only 1 single mouth. Now, what exactly does that mean for us? In the end, it strongly suggests that we should all listen much more than we actually speak, listening twice as much as we talk, in fact. It is a light-hearted and simple saying, but in the high-stakes world of offer negotiations, this principle is extremely important to follow. The more you talk during the meeting, the more disadvantaged you inevitably become. That is because when you talk a lot, you might easily make a slip of the tongue or accidentally reveal unnecessary information to the other side. So when you are negotiating, you must always be incredibly careful with your words and try to speak much less. The best strategy is to always guide the other party to speak more, so you can carefully listen to everything they have to say. Because when the other party talks a lot, various pieces of information get mixed in, and from there, you can discover their true key points, needs, and weak spots. So, the power of listening more than you speak, becomes the third key principle. Next, let's talk about negotiation preparation and offers. This is a strategy. Whenever you receive an offer, in fact, even before you receive one, it is extremely important to prepare a CMA, that is, market data. Later, when hard negotiations begin and the topic of price comes up, sometimes the buyer will even attach such market analysis data to their offer. They might say, based on this data, we set our offer price like this. In response, we need to be able to defend our position, pointing out, for example, this part is incorrect, or these materials are missing, or there is extra information included. Since we need to make logical arguments like this, market analysis data based on facts and data is very important. Even more important, though, is what I always emphasize. You must always prepare a second choice. For buyers, this means you usually view several properties. Among them, you pick your favorite as your first choice, but I always tell clients to select at least one more as a backup. So you create a first choice and a second choice, and with these two properties, you approach the first choice first. That way, if things don't work out, you can immediately switch to your second choice. This is why preparing a backup plan is extremely important. From the seller's perspective, the only real backup plan is to receive multiple offers. Doing your best to always receive multiple offers and making efforts to encourage that, this can be considered the seller's primary strategy. Next, the initial offer that the buyer presents plays a very important role. So, when a buyer makes an offer, they should do so carefully. For example, if the offer price is set too far below the listing price, it could make the seller feel, are you trying to provoke me? Are you disrespecting the seller right now? The seller might feel insulted, and if that happens, the deal can get complicated. Starting off with such a negative impression from the beginning is never good. So, when you write an offer price, you need to be very careful. If you're going to offer a very low price, it's important to provide solid reasons, like market data, to justify why you have no choice but to offer that price. Besides price, you should also make good use of other negotiation points. The two biggest factors in negotiations are price and closing date, but in addition to these, things like the deposit amount, which conditions you include or exclude, and how many days you set for the condition removal period, all of these can be used together to prepare your offer. Next, when an offer comes in, we need to make a counteroffer, but in that case, don't respond immediately. Take a moment to pause. If you write a counteroffer just 10 minutes after receiving an offer, it's highly likely you'll give the impression that you're desperate. So, no matter how urgent your situation is, reacting immediately is very disadvantageous. Also, in most cases, when an offer comes in, it will inevitably be lower than the listing price, unless it's a multiple offer situation. As I mentioned earlier, as a seller, there's no need to take it personally or react emotionally, thinking, are they disrespecting me? There's no need for that at all, because when a buyer sends an offer, even from their perspective, accepting the offer as is, they didn't send it expecting you to get upset. Since both sides know that after 1, 2, or maybe 3 rounds of back and forth it will move to the final offer stage, there's no need to react emotionally even if the initial offer comes in low. Also, there is an order to making strategic concessions, so instead of conceding something big right away, you should start by making small concessions and move step by step toward the middle ground. This is a mutual effort, and this is what is commonly referred to as rapport. So, nurturing this is an important way to achieve successful negotiations. Another point I want to mention on this slide is that if the price gap is large, don't try to resolve everything just with the price. It's also good to balance the other terms and conditions as well. If you can't make a big concession on the price and insist on holding firm, then instead you can match the closing date to what the other party wants, or you can extend the contingency period. There are various other terms as well, so when the price gap is large, it's necessary to negotiate using those other conditions. Now let's talk about a multiple offer situation. When this happens, everything changes. This is no longer a typical negotiation. At this point, you can't really say it's one-sided, but the buyer side no longer has any cards left to play. All that's left is a last-minute game of nerves. Honestly, there's a lot I could say about this, and just this topic alone could be an entire episode. But today, I'll keep it brief. The number of offers is important, but what's really crucial is that the realtor who keeps their nerve and doesn't give up until the very end often wins. That's why it's very tough. Usually, in a multiple offer situation, there's an open house on Saturday and Sunday, and then the cutoff is set for Monday or Tuesday of the following week, usually between 5 and 7 p.m. For example, if the cutoff is at 7 p.m. and I'm on the buyer's side, thank you. Since the seller's side will let you know that it's a multiple offer situation, they'll usually have 1 or 2 offers already prepared. So, at the last minute, if the cutoff is at 7 p.m., around 6:30, you check in to ask how many offers have come in. Then around 6:45, you send in your offer. After sending it, you tell the listing agent, this is our best offer, but is there any chance? If they say no, and if they give you another opportunity, you can say you'll adjust the price. If you judge that your offer is too weak, you might submit a second offer at a similar price at that point. So when there are multiple offers like that, you need to make it into the top 3, the first tier, through the initial screening. That way, you can compete again in the second round. But if you submit a low offer from the start, it's over right then and there. Because this isn't an auction. In an auction, you know the price. Say it's $1 million, then you ask if anyone will bid 1.1 million. That's how auctions work. But in these multiple offer situations, it's a one-shot deal. You put in your highest and best offer all at once, and that's it. It's over. But in a typical multiple offer situation, it doesn't just end in one round like that. Usually they give you one more chance. After the offer deadline, whether or not there are any offers that the seller likes, they often decide to give everyone one more chance. So they'll say, we'll give you about 30 more minutes, so if anyone wants to submit another offer, do it now. This kind of notice is actually very common. You should take advantage of that opportunity to submit a new offer and keep an eye on the competition until the very end. If necessary, your mortgage broker should also be on standby because the price could go up by $20,000 or $30,000. In that case, you need to discuss whether your mortgage can still be approved at the higher price and so on. Since you need to consult by phone, the mortgage broker should also be on standby as a team member. This becomes a very important part of the overall strategy and mind games involved. So, you make a clean offer, and you also prepare the closing date and deposit in advance, attaching a copy of the bank draft when you submit your offer. Even if you need to get a mortgage in a multiple offer situation, since urgency is required, you might even remove the subject to financing condition altogether. Because getting a mortgage is my own issue, and if I already have pre-approval and the house price and other factors are already set, assuming the appraisal comes out sufficiently high, I can even remove the conditions altogether. In any case, by including various things like rent back, if the seller needs to buy a new house, you can offer to let them stay in the house as a renter for a few months, you can create differentiating points. Lastly, you can also appeal to the seller's emotions by writing a letter explaining why you absolutely need to buy this house. These days, this approach doesn't work as well, but even just 10 years ago, depending on the type of buyer, especially among older Western white buyers, these kinds of appeals could be quite effective. So you need a variety of different strategies and wisdom like this when it comes to multiple offer situations. Next, let's talk about emotional management and how to handle things when you hit a roadblock. So once emotions get involved, you need to take a break. There's really no other way. You absolutely have to rest until your emotions settle down, so that's the 24-hour rule. I recommend making any important decisions at least a day later. That's why in English we have expressions like sleep on it, right? When you say, I will sleep on it, it means you'll think it over for a night. So in the end, the 24-hour rule is extremely important. It's best to make important decisions the next day. With a clear mind, especially when your blood pressure is rising and your emotions are running high, take a deep breath, count to 10, and then respond. The key point is to use your agent as a shield. So if the seller and buyer face each other directly and the deal falls through, there's really nothing more you can do. That's why involving an agent in the middle is important. It creates various buffers and is crucial. Lastly, don't burn bridges. No matter how heated or frustrating things get, don't say, I'm done with you. I'm not doing this with you anymore. Don't declare that it's over. It's important to always leave some room for possibilities because you never know what might happen next. So taking a break and allowing a cooling off period can also be a strategy. Lastly, I'd like to share a real life case and then wrap things up. One of the most rewarding experiences I've had was during a multiple offer situation. The daughter of some clients I had helped before was a first-time home buyer and worked at the Taurus headquarters. A nice 2-bedroom condo came up for sale near Willingdon in Burnaby, so she put in an offer, but it turned into a multiple offer situation. She really loved that beautiful home, so I suggested that while we should certainly set our very best price, that alone might not be enough to secure it. I recommended that we send a personal letter to the seller, an earnest, heartfelt letter explaining exactly why she absolutely needed to live in that home. We included the letter with our offer, and in the end, we successfully won the competitive bidding process. Later on, as a follow-up, the listing agent told me that, in fact, we were about $1,000 lower in price compared to another offer. If you just look at the price alone, that is. But at that time, the owners were white seniors, and after reading the sincere letter and seeing that a young woman, as a first-time buyer, had prepared the full deposit and was trying to make